Today, we'll be covering one of my all-time favorite artists, John Singer Sargent. I am fascinated of his work because, to me, he just puts everything where it needs to be. Nothing's overdone, but he gives enough visual information to create the sense of reality. That often, it's quite painterly, but it looks more real sometimes than reality itself. What does this mean exactly? Well, stick around to find out in this video, where we'll be breaking down John Singer Sargent's technique in one of his most famous masterpieces. Today we're going to be going over one of Sargent's most famous paintings, Gertrude Vernon, Lady Agnew of Lochnaw. This video will be split into three main sections. The first section, we're going to be going into the background of Sargent, a little bit about Sargent and his painting itself. And the second part will be my master study process, in which I'll attempt to recreate this painting on Procreate. And then finally, the last part of this video will just be final reflections and key takeaways for the viewers, and how you could take Sargent's techniques and implement it into your own drawing. But of course, before we get started, if you love seeing content like this and would want to learn more about fine arts masters, their techniques, and how you could apply that to your own paintings, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment down in the comment section on what artist/artwork you would like to see me do a study on next. With that out of the way, let's delve into the history behind this painting and a bit of history about Sargent as well. John Singer Sargent was one of the most popular portrait painters among the nobility class during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Sargent was born in 1856 to American parents living in Florence, who would spend most of his early life training in Paris's École des Beaux-Arts. It was after the Madame X scandal that Sargent moved to England, setting up a new studio in London. Sargent would often also visit New York and Boston as well, painting murals for the Boston Public Library and other projects. In 1892, Sir Andrew Agnew commissioned Sargent to paint a portrait of his much younger wife, Gertrude Vernon, also known as Lady Agnew. At the time this painting was created, Lady Agnew was suffering from poor health, still recovering from a bout of influenza. It wasn't exactly known how the Agnews met Sargent, but there's theories that they got in touch through mutual friends. Sargent painted this masterpiece rather quite quickly, with accounts stating that he finished in merely 6 sittings. Now moving on to the painting itself, Lady Agnew is seated on a Louis XVI chair against a backdrop of Chinese silk. She has a direct, intelligent, slightly amused expression, with a relaxed yet elegant pose contrasting to the more stiff portraits of the Victorian era. Sargent's portrait of Lady Agnew helped her become quite popular among high society at the time, and leading to more commissions from Sargent securing his career after moving to England. Okay, I think that's enough about the history of the piece. Well, I'm now going to do a deep dive breakdown of the piece itself and what makes it truly remarkable, even well after 100 years. Now, the first thing I look at when I'm studying any drawing, any composition, or any painting is going to be the composition of the painting. So as we can see here on Lady Agnew, the composition of this painting forms this triangle. Now, many artists going back to the Renaissance painters have used this triangle composition technique to create a sense of stability, to create a sense of balance in a way. Whereas even though Lady Agnew, in this case, is in a more casual, laid-back position, this overall triangle composition enforces a sense of balance in the painting overall. Alright, get that out of the way. Now, not only that, there's also this negative space behind Lady Agnew, all around here, where there's not really much going on. Especially in portrait paintings like this, it is important to make sure that the background is not too distracting, where even if Sargent has these little symbols flying around here, they're still very similar in value to the background itself, and it does not really detract from the viewer's attention to the main subject of the painting, being Lady Agnew. now we've got that out of the way, I would also like to examine some of the edges on this painting. So some of my favorite edges in this case are the edges close to this part of the dress, this purple ribbon, silk ribbon looking thing. As you can see, as I zoom in here, like if I zoom in very closely, like this does not really look like too much, isn't it? But like, it's painted very loosely in a way. But like these hard edges, like these over here, and these over here, they're all in the right places. And the values are all correct. So once you like zoom out, it creates this like dynamic sense of like, almost like texture, very interesting texture, which contrasts to like the softer, more blended like like the dress up there. So that when you first look at the painting, the viewer's eyes are automatically drawn towards this part of like the painting where like the edges are like a lot harder. So one thing to remember is that hard edges always draw the viewer's eye. They have more visual weight in this case. Like even on the face itself, you can see there's like a few like hard edges. Like not everything needs to be blended and soft. Like these few like highlights which are not very blended create this sense of like texture and sense of like it's more interesting for the viewer to look at in this case. Another thing Sargent also does very well is not like overworking certain parts of his painting. This kind of ties back to when I first zoomed into the dress, right? Like if you really zoom into these areas, like there's not a lot really going on there. Like even like if you zoom into like chair, like these are meant to be flowers, right? Or some kind of like flowery pattern. But if you really zoom in here, these are just like quick strokes of the paintbrush, like 1, 2, 3. Like they aren't really rendered out. But that like shifts the viewer attention away from these areas and more towards these areas where you want the viewer to be more focused on, rather. Like Sargent renders out the face, like when you're drawing a portrait, the face and the hands, and these areas where there's a lot more interesting like harder edges, and these areas where they're rendered out a lot more is often where the viewer is going to notice first, and is where you want the viewer to like look. And this is like a tip you guys can take into your own paintings, where like if you want the viewer to focus more on like a specific area, you can like leave the rest of it slightly like less rendered in a way, and render like the face, the hands, maybe like specific like necklace parts as well, to render those parts more, so the viewer like when they first look at the painting, that's where they focus on. That's like the main focus of the painting. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over like some of the aspects of this painting, I'm going to present my own master study on the painting itself, and kind of diving into what I learned throughout the painting process of trying to like copy Sargent's painting, and what like I think I could still improve on a lot of aspects, especially in some of the senses where I sometimes rush into the painting. Yeah, I'll just show you guys. As you can see here in the beginning, I'm really blocking in a lot of the major colors, such as the background, the chair, the dress, and some of the skin tones in there. Yeah, I start with some basic shadows and colors for the face. Really just getting in a lot of the basic colors. Don't want to make anything too detailed yet, because I'm not sure about whether or not the positions are going to be correct, or even if their proportions are correct yet. We're going to be double checking a lot of that later. Really just blocking in big color, blocking in big shadows, using your eye. Honestly, this is one of my favorite parts of painting, because you make so much progress so fast. You turn a white canvas into something that already kind of resembles the person you're trying to paint. here I'm really starting to hone in a bit on the face. I kind of like to render out the face first slightly, so that I kind of have like a benchmark on like, not really a benchmark, but just rendering out the face really just like starts to bring this painting like out a bit, and it makes it seem like a bit more like realistic. It makes the person seem more alive, is what I'm trying to say. See, when I'm beginning rendering the face, I'm like adding some details into the eye area, really adding some details into the nose, mouth, getting the shadows on the face. And the face, the skin is a lot more smooth, so I'll keep that a lot more blended. But Sargent in this case, the face is slightly asymmetrical. Not asymmetrical, it's like, I guess asymmetrical is the term I'm going to use. But it doesn't really throw it off too much. I'll just paint what I see. So sometimes one mistake I make when painting faces is I make it slightly too pale-ish. So I'm really trying my best to capture like the redness, like the light, full of life. Make this painting seem like it's full of life. Really. At this point, I've started to move on to neck area, and I'm now starting to kind of render in the dress, getting some of those bigger colors in. So Sargent really does like keep the dress very simple in this case. Like, I'm not really doing too much when I'm rendering out the dress. It's more of just like putting in like the darker purples, the lighter purples, the whites, the blues, and the shadows, kind of just placing them where I see them. I'm not really thinking about it too much at this point. And the chair, same for the chair. I'm just kind of just like sculpting it, like getting the lights where they need to be, the darks where they need to be. And for the details, as I stated before, it's very loosely painted, so it's kind of just almost like impressionistic at this point. I'm just adding like streaks of color across the canvas and not really worrying about it too much now. Here I'm starting to work on the left arm. I'm also working on the curtains a bit, because a lot of times the background and the curtain there is going to be slightly darker, so it kind of brings the viewer's focus more into Sargent, like what Sargent wants the viewer to focus on, which in this case is Lady Agnew. Just continue to render out the arm. So as I'm rendering, notice I'm also making like small adjustments, really, like small adjustments here and there, using my eye to like discern like where exactly the painting needs these very slight adjustments. Because at this point, you've already got most of the major shapes, colors where they already need to be, but sometimes you see like the curtain needs to be darker, the dress needs to be lighter, this edge needs to be slightly softer, this other edge needs to be slightly more hard. I'm also adjusting parts of the hair. So also tips for the hair. The hair often is just painted very softly. We want to keep the hair very soft and like wispy in a way. Like no really hard edges except for like the few highlights. But often the highlights aren't really like as harsh or as much as you need them to be, just enough to emphasize like the form of the hair. In this sense, you also want to keep the hairline nice and soft. Like some people draw the hairline far too harsh. You want to keep that nice, soft and blended for like the Sargent look. At this point, we're basically almost done with the painting. So really, for the painting process itself, you do want to keep in mind that it's really all about breaking the entire process down into simple, easy, and achievable steps, and taking the time to measure out everything. Because I think sometimes artists put these old masters on a pedestal, really, but they, like us, were also human, and I think it's very interesting to learn their tips and tricks and how they made their pieces and apply that to our own works. Because really, it's all about like, nothing's like, unlearnable in this case. At least that's what I believe. Like Sargent, we might see his works and like might be like awe-stricken almost. But it's important to remember that these painters, they all had to start somewhere, and just like us, it took a lot of hard work for them to get to where they are. Often this hard work just means like really holding in on a lot of the fundamentals, making sure that they are pristine. Especially a lot of these old masters had very, very strong fundamentals. Okay, we're pretty much done with the painting. Here's a quick side-by-side comparison of my piece. Of course, some parts could still be rendered out a bit more. I think some parts of the chair, the values aren't quite right, but I gave it my best shot, and honestly, it doesn't look too bad. Now, of course, at the end of the video, here's the recap you guys are waiting for. So the first thing we covered was edges. Sargent uses hard edges where he wants the viewer to focus. And the second thing, most important thing, is values. Make sure you get all the correct values, shapes, and colors in before you start adding details to ensure that you have like a base that you're working with. You're not building a house without having the foundations laid. And also choosing where to render the work. Like, for portraits specifically, it's the face, the hands, and any other details that you want the viewer to focus on, where you will render the most. Everywhere else, you could leave it a bit more loosely painted if you want it to be more of a Sargent style painting. And lastly, don't be afraid to let that brushwork show. As you could see in Sargent's painting, in various areas, you could see some of the brush strokes, which really adds to the texture of the painting. Once again, thank you for staying around to the end of this video. This is kind of a long one, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you also learned something. I sure learned a lot while going through this entire process of researching, drawing, and be sure to hit the like button, subscribe. That would help me so much to make more videos like this. And be sure to comment down below what other artists or such studies you'd like to see me do next. And have a great day.